Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, we've got a fun little week coming up this week. We are going to talk about week 2 of regionals, although, to be fair, it was, there was one regionals. It was the lovely regionals, it was Lancaster regionals, it was very exciting and all that good stuff. But yeah. To be perfectly honest with you, there was only one, but we are going to go through the final standings from Lancaster Regionals, which again, Remy Cognot has very, very kindly collated together and sent me an email, and had a lovely email from Noah Harrington as well regarding Regionals, which we shall get to if we get a moment. We're also going to be looking all about Blue Impact. It was 2 weeks ago. We went through the Red Flash translations. Remember that in Japan they often split new sets in two. So X and Y were separate sets. Black and White were separate sets. So our X and Y 8 set, what will be our November set, Breakthrough, which has already started leaking. I think there's a few people in the... It sometimes happens in the US that there'll be certain collections... Never the booster boxes, but certain collections which end up being released a bit early, probably by people who don't know much about the trading card game, well-meaning employees who don't really know what they're doing because they don't know much about Pokemon. And that's already started happening, which is, of course, ludicrous. But anyway, point is this. Our set is going to be Breakthrough. This is the second half of Breakthrough. Last week I was a bit poorly, though we still had a 45-minute podcast. Looking at week 1 regionals results. So you can go back 2 weeks to have a look at what I thought of Red Flash with the first half. And today we're looking at Blue Impact. So quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be fun. Little bit of an update from me personally. I haven't been to many tournaments lately. Went to a couple. It's been a few weeks. As it stands at the moment, I will be at Athena Games in Norwich on Friday for their league challenge. Then I'll be popping to Sheffield University for another league challenge run by the lovely people at PokeSock in Sheffield. Now, I will hopefully be recording in Norwich. I've spoken to them. They've said it's looking very likely I'll be recording some games for my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCG Radio. And I have yet to speak to the people in Sheffield. They let me record last time. I'm hoping very much they will let me record again. So 2 standard league challenges, and I know there's an awful lot of expanded, not that much standard going up on YouTube at the moment, so I'm going to be flying the flag for standard this coming week. I've got one more round, an extra little bonus round from the expanded league challenge, which will be going up today or tomorrow, and like I say, hopefully 2 tournaments worth of standard, which will be going up in the near future. Lots of lovely things to look forward to, I think we can agree. So, I should also give you a couple little hints. First of all, if you want a complete archive of this lovely podcast, you can find it at ptcgradio.wordpress.com, or just Google PTCG Radio and click on the WordPress one. And you can follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. So, without further ado, let's have a look at a couple little bits of news. Nothing terribly exciting. But I told you about the World Championship decks a week ago, or more accurately, I told you about 3 of them. We didn't know what the 4th deck was going to be, we hadn't been told. We now know it is going to be Alejandro Unguzman, which I'm probably pronouncing terribly wrong, I apologise. He was the runner-up in the juniors division, and it's going to be his Primal Groudon deck. Which makes sense, we've got one kind of Lando Bats, one Seismitoad, and one Blastoise, so it makes sense to stick a Groudon in there. So we've got a little bit of variety coming out and about here. The other piece of news, and it's been a fairly, I suppose, slow news week in the Pokemon trading card game. We have had some promos. Now, in Japan's tournaments, they have more fun promos than we do. Not just, hey, you've turned up, have a promo. But everyone who goes will be getting a full art Pikachu promo. 100 damage for free lightning, discard all energy, 60 HP. It's not very good, but it's kind of cool. And if you take part in activities, win enough points, you can get a Mewtwo or a Bronzong, or an Empoleon Break. Now, the Bronzong is a reprint. The Mewtwo for a Psychic and a Colourless. Remember that Dimension Valley will bring that down to a Psychic only. 20 damage, flip a coin if heads paralysis. It ain't terrible, but it's not particularly good. For 2 Psychic, 2 Colourless, or 2 Psychic, 1 Colourless with Dimension Valley out, 100 damage, this Pokemon cannot use this attack next turn. It's your classic promo. Doesn't do enough damage, attacks are overpriced, but it's kinda cool and it's fun in your binder. You just ain't using it in a tournament. And Empoleon Break. Now, I've made no secret for my love of Pokemon. I desperately want Empoleon Break to be good, and it's not. Now, we've got the Empoleon that has a pretty rubbishy attack, but it's got the fun little ability, which makes all stage 1s do 20 more damage. Lovely. And Empoleon Break, as we've seen, the breaks, they either add 1 ability or 1 attack. Empoleon adds an attack. Water and a Colourless, 30 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play. Now, this is both good and bad. Let's start with a really obvious downside. It's basically a stage 3. It's a stage 2 that you then have to break evolve. It is horrific. Stage 1s you can get out on turn 2, or turn 1 with Wally. Stage 2s you can get out on turn 2 with Rare Candy. This is a minimum turn 3, because on turn 2 you can either go Wally turn 1 and evolve turn 2, or you can go Rare Candy turn 2, but you've still got to use turn 3 to break evolve. Now, having said that, Water and a Colourless, 30 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play. I would love to see this card with a 1 water cost, because it's like I said, I was saying this way back when X and Y came out and we had the first Mega Pokemon. If you are gonna make these Pokemon this annoying to get into play, you've got to make them really, really flippin' good. And this isn't. It's fine, but it's not good. And it needs to be good. It's a stage 3. If I could potentially do 180 damage for 1 energy, then absolutely I'm gonna play this card. 2 energy on a stage 3, and let's not forget, it's one of those cards that your opponent has control. Your opponent can choose to put out fewer Pokemon. Actually, having said that, it's 240 if you're playing against a deck that's got Skyfield and fills up their bench, but they'd have to be very silly to do that. Really good against something like a Rayquaza deck, but are you really going to be able to get a stage 3 out against a very speedy Rayquaza deck? I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that maybe not. Oh, fiddlesticks. So you see where we're going with this. Now, again, as I always make the point with these kind of cards, even when it's in your opponent's hands, their only way to screw you over in terms of damage is to not bench Pokemon they would otherwise like to bench. So even if they're not doing enough damage, if they're controlling your damage output, they may well be not benching Pokemon they'd like to bench, and they're handicapping themselves a little bit by doing so. It's not as good an attack. The best break we've got so far, I think by quite a margin, is Golduck Break, and even that's not good enough to use. If you could use Archie's Ace in the Hole for this, then maybe I would change my mind and think, yeah, this Empoleon's got a little bit to him. This could be good, but he's not. Sorry, but he's just not. He can't use Archie's Ace in the Hole. We've had that ruling. I want Empoleon Break to be good, and I'm getting one of these bad boys to my folder. It's got the gold break artwork. It is a beautiful thing, but he ain't being played in me decks. And with that, we move on to the old Lancaster Regionals. And Remy, not only has he, and he does confirm he is a guy on the email, he sent me the top 16, which is just lovely. It was a really lovely email. I thank him very much for sending it. Again, what we see here, the first thing to note, we are seeing the same thing we're seeing, which is winner Jimmy O'Brien, second Frank Diaz, third Dylan Bryan, all well-known names in the US scene. 12th we had Chris Fulop, 13th we had Michael Diaz. These are well-known players to me, and I've never been to the US. Not to play Pokemon in an actual US competition. I did go to Worlds in 2012 in Hawaii. Point is this, the good players are still winning. So anyone that wants to sit there and go, it's all luck, there's too much luck. There is absolutely luck in the Pokemon trading card game. Otherwise, the same people would win every single turn. But we are getting the same names popping up very regularly. It's not no luck, it's not all luck, but there is a hefty dose of skill involved. So if anybody ever tells you, it's just luck, it's all luck, no, it's not. Because the best players do rise to the top, tournament after tournament, year after year. Now, I believe Jimmy O'Brien had some ridiculous record, which was something like 16 wins and a draw. 16 wins and a draw. It was something like 7-0-1 on day 1, 5-0 on day 2, and then, top 8, top 4 and the final. I can't remember exactly. It's something like 16-0-1. It might have even been more than that. It was a ridiculous performance, the likes of which we've never seen. And I love the fact that there were rounds he clearly could have ID'd and got into top 8. And he said, no, I am doing well. I am having a good tournament. I would like to play you. Which is lovely. And I want to repeat again, an argument I've seen again and again and again and again. And I'm still seeing it on posts every time there's a large regionals. If you concede to your opponent to let them into Top Cut, that is not a nice thing to do. If there's going to be an ID, and an ID puts both you and your opponent out of Top Cut, so you concede to them so they make Top Cut and you don't, that is not a nice thing to do. It seems like a nice thing to do, but there are 8 places in Top Cut. If it was everyone who achieved a particular record, then yeah, absolutely scoop people into Top Cut. But it's not. There are a finite 8 positions, which means that there was, and I saw a very prominent player, won't name them, but a very prominent player who posted on the Facebook group Burbank City Gym, I believe it was after regionals last week. A very, very prominent player, very well respected in the community. And he posted, it was one of his rounds, I think it's his final round. In my final round, I knew a draw would put both of us out of Top Cut, so I scooped to my opponent to put him into Top Cut. And everyone's going, yeah, good work. But it's not. Sorry if that was really loud. I don't usually clap on the podcast. That's a horrible thing to do. Because think of it, if you just think of it as your opponent wasn't going to make Top Cut, now they did. That seems like a lovely thing to do. Think of it another way. That match should have ended in a draw. That draw would have rightfully put a different person, let's call him Bob, that would have put Bob in Top Cut. Bob earned his way into Top Cut. If all the games finished fairly, the way they should have, Bob gets into Top Cut. But Bob doesn't make Top Cut because, let's call him Billy. Billy has gone, I'm a nice person. I'm going to scoop my opponent into Top Cut. But your opponent didn't deserve to be in Top Cut, Billy. Your opponent didn't win the game. You've just screwed Bob out of Top Cut. It's not a nice thing. Sorry if that sounds a bit ranty. I'm feeling a little bit better, which is why I'm able to rant. Last week, you weren't getting any passionate rants out of me. But seriously, and I see this every time there's a big tournament, people going, I scooped my opponent into Top Cut because neither of us could make it with a draw and I'm a lovely person. No, you're a horrible person. You have scooped someone who didn't deserve into Top Cut at the expense of someone who did. Here's a novel idea. Let's just end the games that should be draws as draws. And see who actually deserves to get into Top Cut. Obviously, there's a huge caveat here. If the person you're playing is a good friend of yours, scoop them into Top Cut. I would do that. But I wouldn't just do it for some random. Alrighty then, that's my rant. So what do we see in terms of decks? We see a huge meta game shift. This is what I was talking about last week. There are 2 possible results. When you have a regionals like last week, where 2 decks really dominated, there are only 2 potential outcomes. There's only 2 that ever happen. Number 1, people double down. So it's Evil Talon and Blastoise last week. And one possible outcome is we double down. Everyone plays Evil Talon, everyone plays Blastoise, and we just see a ridiculous domination, like we've seen in the past from decks like Gardevoir Gallade and Darkrai and Blastoise even, back when it was at the height of its powers, Virizion Genesect at Worlds 2014. Basically, we see everyone going, this is the best deck, I'm just going to have to play it. Or we see everyone going, right, let's make some counter decks. And that's what happened this week. In Lancaster Regionals, there was 0 Blastoise in top 8. Joseph Ambrosone did make 14th place with Blastoise. Eviltal did do better. Eviltal, Frank Diaz made 2nd with it, and Nate Pear made 7th, so 1/4 of top 8 was still Eviltal. So what does that tell us about Blastoise and Eviltal? It tells us 2 very clear things. Blastoise is really easily countered. Eviltal is not. Because if Eviltal was very easily countered, it would have gone out of the top cut. Now, there is another explanation. The other explanation is people wanted to counter Blastoise more than they wanted to counter Eviltal. But from testing and what I've seen, Eviltal is a much more versatile deck with less counters. Blastoise revolves around abilities. It's all consumed with a grass weakness and so on. Whereas Eviltal can mix up its weaknesses by playing stuff like Darkrai or Absol, and it can use, it doesn't need abilities to get rolling. And it tends to play Laser, which Blastoise can't find room for, and stuff along these lines. So, let's go through the top 8. In 8th place, we had Dean Nazam with Mega Manectric Tool Drop. In 7th, we had Nate Pear with Eviltal. No details, unfortunately, on which Eviltal builds, but you can assume they probably had a single Archeops in, at the least. 6th, we had Azul Garcia with Mega Manectric Tool Drop. 5th, we had Steven Veresco with Mega Manectric. You're going to have to forgive my pronunciations here. Moving into top 4, we had Carl Satavi with Seismitoad Giratina and Dylan Bryan with Vesperquen. And in the final, Frank Diaz's Eviltal lost out to Jimmy O'Brien's Vesperquen. So what do we see here? We see 2 Vesperquen in top 8. We see 2 Eviltal in top 8. We see 3 Manectric in top 8, 2 with Tool Drop, 1 without, and we see 1 Seismitoad Giratina. That's the top 8. So the question becomes, what trends can we draw from this? And the first thing to point out very clearly is this. You can't read too much into this. Week 1, it was kind of a bit of a crapshoot. Nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody really knew what was going to be good. Eviltal and Blastoise rose to the top. Week 2, everyone went, right, Eviltal and Blastoise have risen to the top, so let's counter Eviltal and Blastoise, hence decks like Vesperquen, which I'll get to in a second. But other than that, we don't know. We need more tournaments. Had Eviltal and Blastoise been the top decks this week, I would have been comfortable sitting here going, they're the 2 best decks. As it is, we don't know, but there are some things we can say. So let's get some takeaways from this. First off, Eviltal's good. Eviltal's really, really good. It made 2 of the top 8 places, despite being the top joint best deck for... I'm not willing to put it above or below Blastoise. I'm putting it joint from last week. The joint best deck from last week. It was a joint best deck, and it rose to the top. Again, made it all the way to the final. Takeaway number 2. Blastoise is easily countered. I told you before regionals that I thought it was the safest, bestest deck to play. I stood by it at the time. The thing is, it's easily countered. Mega Manectric Tool Drop can do quite well against it. And Vesperquen can do quite well against it. We didn't talk about them last week, so they're coming up in a moment. And of course, abilities can block it. Even something like Leafeon can be absolutely punishing. Although, I should point out, I forget who it was. I apologise, because the person who it was is probably listening, and I'm not going to give you credit. But when I spoke about my Raichu Leafeon deck last week, I just suggested it might be a deck which countered both of those decks. Somebody pointed out Deden. Yeah. Does more damage depending on how much energy is on you, and it hits lightning. So it can be pretty good against stuff like Eviltal. But of course, if Eviltal sits there and uses Y-Cyclone, they can make sure they've only ever got 1 energy on, and the Den does 40 damage. It's not so good. They hate you with a Muscle Band, but that's still not a 2-hit KO. So, let's look at the 2 new decks. Firstly, Mega Manectric Tool Drop. How did this possibly do so well? Well, first, the obvious one. It hits Eviltal for weakness. Now, one thing I find very interesting, and I don't have the top 8 matchups in front of me, all 3 Mega Manectric went out in top 8. And an Eviltal made it to the final. So did Frank Diaz's Eviltal beat Nate Pear in a mirror match in top 8, or did he have to take down one of the Mega Manectric? Either way, regardless of whether he did or not, Mega Manectric is really efficient against Yveltal. It one-hit KOs because of 220 for just 2 energy, and you can use Mega Turbo if you want to get it going in one turn, although you do have to wait a turn to evolve. It's just good. Really good against Yveltal. Well, hang on a second. Is it good against Blastoise? Yeah, it's good against Blastoise. It takes an awful lot, if you look at Caldeo's attack, it does 50 damage as a base, plus 20 for each water energy attached to it. Mega Manectric has 210 HP, which means when you take out the 50 base, you've got to do 160 damage. That's 8 energy. And most of these Blastoise decks, the lists that I've seen, generally tend to play 11 energy. You've got to have 8 of your 11 energy on him in one go to get a KO on Mega Manectric. When it gets KO'd, you then only have 3 energy in the deck. You need 8 energy. You've got to play 2 superior energy retrievals just to get enough energy to put back onto your Caldeo to get a return KO. See where we're going with this? Caldeo is not good against Mega EXs. It's really not good. Why are people playing it with Tool Drop? Because Manectric's got problems. Tool Drop, but if you think about what Manectric needs, Manectric, Mega Manectric, Spirit Link, couple energy, maybe the Stadium. Oh, and by the way, if you don't one-hit KO the Mega Manectric, then you retreat for free and heal it with Rough Seas, taking off 30 damage per turn. So yeah, it's pretty good. But you've got plenty of space in the deck. There's more than enough room to add in whatever you want. What do you add in? Tool Drop Trubbish, whole bunch of tools. You don't even need a Dimension Valley in here. I'd play 1 or 2 to bring its attack cost down to a single Psychic, because you can afford to just attack with Mega Manectric and use the attack to put 2 energy onto the Tool Drop Trubbish. This is really good against non-EXs. It's really good against anything that's Psychic weak. But crucially, as soon as anything fighting comes out, Manectric sits in the corner and cries. Trubbish comes out and goes, "Don't worry, boys. I'm here. I will take out these pesky fighting type attackers." It's kind of one of these weird decks that don't often work, that tries to do 2 things. It tries to be a Tool Drop deck, and it tries to be a Manectric deck. But Manectric needs so little stuff to be efficient to get going that you can afford to play a whole bunch of tools. It really is quite a fun little deck. And then we get to Vespiquen. Now, why has Vespiquen risen to the top? I mean, there's quite simple reasons. It's an efficient grass-type attacker. Everything in Blastoise is weak to grass. And secondly, Yveltal is weak to lightning. But let's not forget that Vespiquen can take down Yveltal because it can play the Jolteon, which makes Vespiquen lightning-type as well. So why didn't Vespiquen just absolutely own the tournament? Very simple. It's not as consistent as we all thought it was going to be. Believe me, if it was, it would be the best deck out there. Now, I want to see Jimmy O'Brien's list. I don't know if it's actually been put on the interweb. I need to have a look at that. Jimmy O'Brien's list has got to be good. But Jimmy O'Brien is a fantastic player. He's a lovely guy and a fantastic player. I believe I met him at Worlds. I could be wrong. I think I met him at Worlds. He's a lovely, lovely chap. Even if I haven't met him, I know people who know him, so I can confirm that the lovely chap comment is appropriate. But he's an exceptional player with an exceptional list. Other people clearly aren't really clearing up with this deck. So there's some consistency issues there, or, maybe they met bad matchups or whatever. Vespiquen is not good against everything, but it is really good against Groudon or anything that's grass weak, like, for instance, Keldeo. Yveltal, not so good, but it can absolutely take it down. And we've talked about all the other decks. There's one deck I want to talk about in the top 16, but just filling out the top 16. In 16th, we had Jay Lepo with Mega Manectric Genesect Garbodor. In 15th, we had Mega Manectric Leafeon Hunter Harless. 14th, we had Joseph Ambrose's Lone Blastoise, the only one that made top 16. In 13th, we had Mike Diaz with Seismitoad Crobat. 12th, we had Chris Fulop with Yveltal Raichu. 11th, we had Benjamin Sork with Vespiquen. 10th, I don't have the deck in front of me, I'm afraid, but it was Kyle Lesnowicz, sorry. And in 9th, we had a deck which, again, I really want to see a list for. Greg Sweeney's Tyrantrum Bronzong Giratina. Now, Bronzong, obviously, I'm assuming it's the one which attaches metal energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon. Giratina is the one that for 2 colourless, 2 coloured energy, or really 2 colourless and a double dragon, does 100 damage and blocks you playing Stadium, Special Energy, or Tools. And we've got Tyrantrum. Do you remember what Tyrantrum does? There's only one non-EX. It came out in Furious Fist. Have you got it yet? It's the first attack. Chew Up for a fighting double colourless, 60 damage. If your opponent's got any special energy attached to it, it does 90 more. You pop a muscle band on, you're doing 170 for free energy. And Evil Tau, okay, he's fighting resistant, but Evil Tau uses special energy, Seismitoad uses special energy, Giratina uses special energy, Vespiquen uses special energy. I could keep going, but you get the point here. You know what doesn't use special energy? Manectric. I don't think Tyrantrum's worried. I love that this made, and it was annoying, I was so gutted when I saw this, 9th place. It just missed out on top 8. I would love to have seen this bad boy in top 8. How it would go against Vespiquen, it's weak to grass, it's a fair bit slower. I don't know, but I'd love to have seen it anyway. It has got a second attack. The second attack does 150 for 4 energy, or 170 with a muscle band, but can't attack next turn. So if they haven't got special energy, you can still do 150. You just need to add a second fighting energy. Only downside of this deck I can see is the energy line. You need metal for the Bronzong, and you need fighting for the Tyrantrum, and you need double dragon for the Giratina. Having said that, you can just play a few metal energy, get them in the discard pile nice and early with Battle Compressor, and just reuse them from the discard pile. So clearly Greg made a very consistent deck and he got this working. I love it. I love interesting decks like this. They make me very happy. So that's all I'm going to say about regionals, because we need to move on. We need to have a chat about Blue Impact. Now, we've seen all these Blue Impact cards before. The vast majority of them anyway. I've been talking about them week by week as they've been revealed in Japan, but I still want to have a chat about them today because, well, why wouldn't I? We now got the whole set. If you want to see what I said about Red Flash, go back and check podcast 164 from 2 weeks ago. As I said, it will always be on YouTube. youtube.com/PTCG Radio, or on WordPress at ptcgradio.wordpress.com. So let's have a gander at this. We've got Pinsir. For 1 grass energy, 30 damage, 20 damage to one of your bench Pokemon. It's alright. It's not terrible. 40 damage plus 20 more for each colourless in your opponent's retreat cost. Not bad, but for a grass double colourless, it ain't good. And yeah, we've got things like Mega Sceptile and the non-Mega and the non-EX Sceptile, and we can accelerate grass energy, but I still don't think it's particularly good. We've got a Simisage. Now, I told you about this last week 2 weeks ago with Simisear, and there's a Simipour as well. 2 attacks. For 1 colourless energy, you can put 3 of the relevant energy from your discard pile into your hand. Grass for Simisage, Water for Simipour, and Fire for Simisear. And for a double colourless, 10 damage times the number of cards in your hand. It's not terrible. It's not particularly good. If you're going to play one, Simisage is the one to play because you can use Broken Vine Space to get him going in 1 turn. We have a Spupa, which isn't particularly good, but he evolves into a Vivillon, which is interesting. Ability Energy Color. Once during your turn, flip a coin. If heads, search your deck for a basic energy card and attach it to one of your Pokemon. He joins the ranks of interesting Stage 2 Grass Pokemon. His attack is garbage. Grass double colourless for 60 and sleep. But he joins the rank, and there's a lot of these, Ludicolo being my favourite. He joins the rank of grass Pokemon that have interesting abilities, garbage attacks, and are Stage 2, but are now worth thinking about given that we've got Broken Vine Space, so you can evolve them whenever you want. It is universal energy acceleration. So if ever I'm talking about a deck where I'm going, but there's no way to accelerate Psychic, Fighting, whatever, If there's any way you could fit a 1/1/1 line of this into your deck and get him rolling, energy attachment from the deck, this has got real potential. I think this is going to make it into a deck at some point, and it's going to be good. Certainly if you're running a grass deck, why wouldn't you just run a 1/1/1 line of this just to try and get it rolling? It could be good. It's also a real shame that Pavilion is grass, because if this was fighting or water, then the Archies and Maxies cards would have a field day with this bad boy. But he's not. Typhlosion. Now, second attack, 130 for 2 fire and a colourless. Discard an energy to attach to both active Pokemon. But the attack I'm really interested in is this first one, Massive Eruption. Firstly, it's quite hilariously named. Younger viewers don't listen to that. But for 1 fire energy, 80 damage. Discard the top 5 cards of your deck. 80 damage times the number of energy cards you discarded. You discard 3, you're rolling. Now, let's not forget that we've got that Gallade coming out, which allows you to rearrange the top cards of your deck. Do you really want to be playing a deck? It just allows you to look at the top 5 and rearrange them in any order. Do you really want to be playing a deck with 2 stage 2s, neither of which are grass, so you can't use Broken Vine Space? Probably not. But it's 1 energy, and you can potentially 1-hit KO Mega EXs. With a Muscle Band, 2 energy will be enough to KO EXs. 3 energy will be enough to KO Mega EXs. There's got to be a deck here somewhere. There's got to be somebody that can make this work. You'd have to pay a lot of energy in the deck, but then if you're playing a whole bunch of energy in the deck, just throw in 4 fiery torches so you can discard them, and then use fiery torch. I would love to think there's some kind of deck out there where you just use Typhlosion and a whole bunch of fire energy to smash. It's a deck I'm going to make and test at some point. I don't think it's ever going to be amazing, but oh my goodness, I want to give it a try. We have a Remoraid, which isn't very good. Sorry, but we have an Octillery. I've done that joke twice now, was it? It probably wasn't good the first time. Hey-ho. What is good is Octillery's ability, Abyss Hand. What a name for an ability. Draw cards until you got 5 in your hand. It's better than Bicycle. It's better than the Stage 1 Electrode people used to play. It's just plain good. There we go. The attack isn't. It's got a really nice ability. We're going to look at all the EXs and Mega EXs in one go at the end, so please don't be offended. We have the latest in a long line of interesting Vanillux cards. And actually, we've got 2 really interesting attacks here. Firstly, Shivering Press. Water and a colourless, 30 damage, neither player until the end of your next turn, so that's your next turn as well as your opponent's, neither player can play any supporter or stadium cards. There is a potential here that you make a speed deck based around trainer and shaman draw rather than supporter draws, and you play supporter lock with Vanillux. So, going for blocking both of you. I mean, it's better than Stoutland was. And you've got a really nice second attack. 70 damage for water, double colourless. Flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralysed. If tails, they're confused. And let's not forget you've got Trick Coin, which will allow you to reflip if you don't get the desired result. Or in Expanded, you've got Fliptini that allows you to reflip. That's pretty cool. Although remember, they don't work together. It's one or the other. There is, especially, let's say you play it with Vileplume, there's a deck there. Now, obviously, playing it with Vileplume means your trainer and supporter locked as well, which is potentially worrying. But then you can supporter lock them until you want to be doing more damage, and you can paralyze them. You can supporter lock them until you've got a Vileplume, and then, so you're using all your trainer cards, and then you can start paralyzing them. I kind of like the idea. Like Typhlosion, I don't know if it's going to be great, but I love the idea. The more I think about it, the more I want that Typhlosion to be amazing. I don't know if it's going to be amazing, but oh my goodness, I want it to be. So yeah, fun times. we have a Haunter. Now, I'm not doing the joke again. Haunter's actually relevant in his own right. We've got the ability Gothic Fear. When you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you can use this ability. Both active Pokemon are now confused. That's kind of cool. I like that. Also, now bearing in mind you would then... If you use the attack, you would be confused. So you've got to be careful. But it's got a nice attack. For a Psychic Colourless, remember... Dimension Valley brings it down to a Psychic, and I'm sorry, I am going to mention that every time I talk about Psychic Pokemon, just like I'm going to mention Broken Vine Space every time I talk about Stage 1 or Stage 2 Grass. It's relevant, people. Your opponent's Pokemon is poisoned and can't retreat. If you use the ability as well, you can then have them poisoned and confused and unable to retreat. Haunter could actually be a nice, viable attacker. How cool is that? Very. How do you get around this? Well, you would just leave. You would try and make it so that something with free retreat was in the active. Then you would evolve the Haunter on the bench to confuse the thing with free retreat. And then you would just free retreat so Haunter wasn't confused to use the attack. That's what you try and do. And then we've got Gengar. Ominous Fog, 1 Psychic Energy. Oh, I love this. No, I don't. I love the second attack. I'm lying to you. For 1 Psychic Energy, your opponent's Pokemon is now poisoned, and put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Bearing in mind, in any Gengar deck, you're probably going to have Haunters as well, so you can be chucking in Confusion at your every whim, which is useful. But the attack, which is really fun, is Creepshow. 1 Psychic, 1 Colourless. Again, Dimension Valley brings it down to 1 Psychic. If your opponent's active Pokemon has at least 3 damage counters on it, that Pokemon's knocked out. Can anyone say Gengar Bats? Crobat, instant knockout. Doesn't matter what kind of Pokemon you are, doesn't matter about weakness, resistance, HP, or anything else, Crobat, knockout. That's kind of cool. I kind of like that. Again... Every set we seem to have interesting stage 2s that I go, well, they're stage 2s. I really think between Gallade, Typhlosion, Vanillux, Gengar, I really think in our next set in Breakthrough we've got some stage 2s that are actually worth mucking about with. Let's not forget we got a whole bunch of interesting Pokemon that use Psychic Energy, like Latios, like DEX, like Deoxys, who you want to use for a couple of turns, but only a couple of turns, and then in comes Gengar. I've told you on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, we've got all these fun little psychic Pokemon. Can we finally have somebody to finish off the game, a big attacker, to make these cards like Latios, EX, Deoxys, Natu, etc. into a viable deck? Maybe Gengar's the one. Like Vanillux, he always has interesting cards. I can't tell you that this Gengar's going to be amazing. This Gengar could be rubbish. It could never see any play. I'm also really not a fan of the artwork, which is weird, because Gengar artwork's usually really good. But I like this. And he's got free retreat. Yeah. So you can just retreat your Gengars every turn while you are confusing with Haunter. He's only got an attack cost of 1. So you attack with a Gengar, free retreat. Lovely. That's just cool. Gengar's the only one that has free retreat, though both Haunter and Ghastly have a retreat cost of 1. Because, those ghosts can't retreat easily? I don't know. We've got a Swoobat. It's not very good. For a colourless energy, you can make Echo Return do 60 more damage the following turn. For 1 psychic energy, Echo Return, 60 damage, 120 if you used Wave Amplifier the previous turn. Flip a coin, if heads, return this Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your hand. Which could have the weird effect, in that if that's the only Pokemon you've got out, and you use that attack and flip tails, you lose the game because you bench yourself. I'm not a fan. There is a Beheeyem, which is, I don't know. For 1 psychic energy, 20 damage times the number of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And there are some cards like, I don't know, what am I thinking about here? Groudon. That's 80 damage for 1 energy. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. Combine it with Haunter for some confusion. Primal Groudon. Confusion ain't going to go well for Primal Groudon. There is a Sandslash. I like Sandslash. He's one of the originals, and he doesn't come round all that often. But it's just garbage. There's a Meloetta. I mean, we talked about it before. It's not great. For a colourless energy, attach 2 fighting energy from your discard pile to Meloetta, and then switch it to the bench, because it's only got 90 HP, it ain't lasting long. For a fighting double colourless, 60 damage. If they've got any psychic attached, it does psychic energy, it does 100 more damage. For a fighting double colourless. So the theory is that one turn you use Excel Spin to get the 2 fight, you put a psychic on, use Excel Spin to get 2 fighting on, and then you've got a psychic and 2 fighting to do 110 the next turn. It's not a particularly efficient attack. It's not one you should be terribly excited about. Now, we have a Cacturn. 40 times the number of heads from free coin flips for free energy ain't good. But for 1 dark energy, 30 damage, and discard a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, things like Seismitoad, Giratina, Groudon, these things really like their special energy. That could be interesting. I don't think it's particularly good, but it could be interesting. And now, right at the end, we get... Well, not quite right at the end, but there ain't much to go. We have one of the most interesting cards in the set, Zoroark. And I will do the breaks as we go through. Zoroark, Stage 1 Dark Pokemon, the ability Impersonate. It's Caldeo's Russian. Caldeo has been rotated from Standard. Floatstone is still in Standard now, has been reprinted. This is awesome. It just is. Attack, double colourless energy, Mind Jack, 10 damage plus 30 more for each Pokemon on your opponent's bench. They've got 3 Pokemon out on the bench. You're doing 100 for 1 double colourless. This is a really good Pokemon, ladies and gentlemen. And then you've got Zoroark Break. 1 dark energy. Choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it. And it's like the foul play from Black and White Zoroark. That's mentally good. I've differentiated between this on the podcast in the past. You do not need the requisite energy. Your opponent's attack takes 4 energy. Oh, well, that's okay. I've got 1 dark energy. Yeah. I really like Zoroark. And let's not forget that Eviltal and Eviltal EX are still in Standard. I really like Zoroark. He is the 1 break Pokemon I can see seeing play. I prefer Golduck, but Golduck is only good essentially as a Stage 2 without Rare Candy. The Stage 1 Zoroark is good, and all the break does is add 40 HP up to 140, and a really good attack. You don't need the break for Zoroark to be good. And he's a Stage 1. That's why he's different to the other break Pokemon. Get yourself some Zoroark Break, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very useful deck indeed. Your opponent's active Pokemon is going to have an attack they like. You can steal it. I mean, I remember there was a Dragonite that did Deafen for free energy that stopped you playing... It stopped you playing your opponent playing trainer cards. It was Deafen Lot. It wasn't Deafen, that wasn't what they called it, but it essentially was. Deafen was... Dialga, or Dialga G if you want to be a pedant, which I do. But it had another attack for 4 energy and a whole bunch of coloured energy, which did like 90 damage. And I was playing Zoroark at the time, and I had a 100% record against these Dragonite decks, because I could use their second attack to kill them before they killed me, and they couldn't use their second attack. And you'll get things like that, which is awesome. There's a Gramble. Gramble's terrible. There is a Florges. It's a Stage 2. It reduces the attack cost of all fairy Pokemon by 1 fairy energy. And with the translation we've got, it will stack. I.e., 2 Florges, 2 fairy energy less. This could be interesting. It's a stage 2. Florge's Break, a stage 3, it adds an ability where once during your turn you can heal 30 damage and remove one special condition. Having a Pokemon that reduces your attack cost for every fairy Pokemon and lets you heal 30 damage and remove a special condition every turn, that's awesome. But on a stage 3, there's a Xerneas, which is interesting. For a fairy double colourless, 10 damage plus 30 more for each type of your bench Pokemon, i.e. if they're all fairy you do 40, if there's one fighting you do 70. But for 2 fairy, 2 colourless, 80 damage, if you recovered any HP, it does 160 damage. Now 160 for 4 energy is a lot to ask. Remember that you've got Aromatisse so you can keep your energy on the board. But if you've got 2 Florges out, it's 160 for a double colourless. Now we're talking. You've just got to get a couple of stage 2s out. There is a Haxorus. And this is... it's a one I made a mistake about a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. But let's make it clear now. Dragon's Dance for 1 colourless energy. Each of his attacks do 100 more damage. This effect continues until this Pokemon leaves play, and you cannot apply it more than once. I.e., if Haxorus goes to the bench, Dragon's Dance still works. It only goes away when he gets KO'd or you scoop him up. Which means you can then do Sharp Fang, 1 energy, 160 damage. Dragon Pulse, fighting in a metal, or one double dragon, 230 damage. Now you have to discard the top 3 cards from your deck. But 230 for 1 energy attachment is ludicrous. Now, to be fair, you've still got to get a stage 2 out, and you've got to attack with him once, and then leave him active to be hit at least once before you can start really smashing with him. But oh my goodness, is this awesome. Play some healing cards to keep him alive as long as possible. He's got 160 HP. He is another stage 2 that, like Gengar, like Gallade, really has a lot of... He's got potential, put it that way. There's a lot of potential here. And we're going to finish... we'll finish with my favourite one. There's an Ursaring. He's not my favourite one. 3 colourless energy, 50 damage to... you choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, like Lysandra. It does 50, and you bring it active. 4 energy, 80 damage, 40 more for each heads from 2 coin flips. It ain't good. Smeargle... recoating the ability, terrible attack. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may switch 1 basic energy card attached to one of your active... let me start again. Once during your turn, I should probably edit that out, but I'm not going to. You may switch 1 basic energy attached to your active Pokemon with 1 different type of basic energy in your discard pile. So for argument's sake, and this is a basic Pokemon, let's think about that Tyrantrum Giratina Bronzong deck. You use Bronzong to put free metal energy on there. You stick Tyrantrum in the active, and then you just switch the metal which you put on with Bronzong for a fighting which you discarded earlier. You could play a few different types of basic energy in a deck with battle compressors. Just discard 1 of every type of energy, and then you can just switch it for whatever you want when you get them active. It's a fun little ability. It's an ability that people are going to use and going to have fun with. You can just afford to play 1 random colour of energy, just in case. So let's say you're playing Mr. Mime to block bench attacks. You can now afford to just have 1 fairy energy in your discard pile and then switch it onto him if you ever need it. Just discard it the second you find it. Not saying that's good, not saying it's going to be awesome, saying it is an option. So, my favourite card in the set, and I want this to work with Vileplume so bad it hurts. If I can make this work, it's going to be my ECC deck. Spoiler alert. Noctowl. Now, firstly, the basic Hoot Hoot, for a double colourless energy, Trainer Locks them. No damage, but it Trainer Locks them. And in a Vileplume deck, if you can't get a turn 1 Vileplume, but you can use Hoot Hoot, that's just as good. Secondly, Noctowl, second attack's garbage. It's only got 90 HP and it's weak to lightning. So, for argument's sake, something like a Manectric's going to have a field day with this, or a Den. 20 damage. Well, that's not the whole story. Both players reveal their hands. 20 damage times the number of item cards in both players' hands. And the Vileplume lists I've been playing around with are really trainer heavy to get the turn 1 Vileplume. Which means, when I've got the Vileplume set up, I've got a handful of trainers which will fuel Noctowl's attack. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's not a case of, I hope my opponent... No. Don't hope anything about your opponent. You make sure you've got 7 trainers in hand, so you do 140 for a double colourless energy. He's a better attacker than Miltank. And because you're using colourless energy, you can still use something like a Regice, for instance, with water energy and a double colourless, to block attacks from EXs. It is, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful, wonderful card. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make a Vileplume, Miltank, Noctowl, Regice deck, but gosh darn it, I'm going to try. I'm also putting a Bunnelby in because, Bunnelby. So before we get rolling today, let's have a very quick look at the EXs and the trainer cards. We've gone through all of these before. So, Glalie and Mewtwo have Spirit Links, of course they do. We have got a reprint of Floatstone, really, really good. And now that we've got Zoroark, which has Caldeo's ability, that is even better. We have one supporter, it is Bridget. Search your deck for one basic EX, or up to 3 basic Pokemon, non-EX, and put them onto your bench. It's Pokemon Collector! And don't be sitting there thinking, well, hang on a second, Ross. I don't want to get one EX. Then get Hooper, which allows you to search for free Pokemon EX. It is Pokemon Collector. It is going to see play. If you're playing a deck that doesn't revolve around EXs, let's say a Vileplume deck, you search for free basics. If you need EXs, you search for a Hooper and get free EXs. Now, obviously, if you're playing a deck which only has EXs, you wouldn't play this. But if you've got a mix, something like Manectric Tool Drop, this will be really, really good. Really good. There's a reprint of Rainbow Energy because Rainbow Energy will be in the format forever. That was, I think, a brief time it wasn't in the format before Heart Gold, Soul Silver, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be in the format forever. And finally, Parallel City. This is, and I wondered if there were going to be more than one of these. The answer is no. It is a one-off, and it's Parallel City, so it looks like it will remain a one-off, if I'm honest. You put it down whichever way you choose. One player can only have 3 bench Pokemon. The other, their Fire, Water and Grass Pokemon do 20 less damage. That's really cool. If you're playing a Fire, Water and Grass deck, you play this and then you go, if you're not playing a Fire, Water or Grass, then you just play this. You put that side on you, and your opponent can only have 3 bench Pokemon. If you are playing Fire, Water, or Grass, you probably shouldn't play this card. But what you can do is you can play it there, and if your opponent has Fire, Water, or Grass Pokemon, you just limit your own bench, and they do 20 less damage to all of your Pokemon. It's a fun little card. Don't know how much play it will see, but if I'm not playing Fire, Water or Grass, I'm considering it in every deck from now on. So let's go through the EXs nice and quickly. There is a Mewtwo and there is a Mega Mewtwo. And remember, the Mewtwo also has a ridiculously beautiful full art as well as the regular and the full art. Mewtwo does 30 damage for a double colourless. During your next turn, its damage done to Mewtwo is reduced by 30. 2 Psychic, 2 Colourless, 120. It's not good, but remember we had the Mega Mewtwo from Red Flash, which is amazing. What about the Mega Mewtwo from this one? It ain't good. Psychic, 2 Fighting and a Colourless, 150. If there's a stadium in play, 200. Regardless, this attack's damage isn't affected by resistance or any other effects on the defending Pokemon. Psychic, 2 fighting and a colourless, it's too expensive, it's too awkward. It's like the old dragon Pokemon and why nobody would play them, with the added bonus, and I say bonus, I mean the opposite, it's not a dragon. It's a psychic, so you can't use double dragon energy. It's not good. When it comes to Mewtwo, ladies and gentlemen, just use the other Mega Mewtwo. And we'll finish with Glalie and Mega Glalie. There's a lot of cards from this set I really want to make into decks. I am fascinated by the Gallade. I'm fascinated by the Gengar. I think they legitimately could be good. And I'm fascinated by the Typhlosion, which I think probably isn't going to be good. And here's the and Hoot Hoot, obviously Hoot Hoot. Here's the last card that I really want to have a talk about, because I really like this card. Glalie EX. For 1 water energy, flip a coin. If heads, they're paralyzed. Nobody cares. For a water double colourless, 50 damage. If you've got the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, it does 150. 150 for 2 energy attachments is pretty good. But it's the Mega I'm enamoured with which I'm enamoured. Again, water double colourless, 100 damage. If there are 10 or more damage counters on this Pokemon, does 150 more. Which means you can have 120 HP left and be hitting 250 for 2 energy attachments, enough to knock out any Mega EX. My preferred way of playing this, and people have disagreed with me, and they're more than welcome to do so, I would play it with Rough Seas. You sit there just hitting 100 a turn. 100's pretty good. I just sit there hitting 100 every turn. Yeah, don't mind me, I'm just sitting here hitting 100 damage. Just you move on. I'm fine. Just leave me be. I'm happy. I'm just sitting here doing 100 damage. And then, when you've got enough damage on, you're like, I'm just going to sit here doing 250 damage. You keep a Lysandre in hand, and it's weak to metal, which is not a deck many people are playing at the moment. Even metal decks, most of them are playing things like Rayquaza. They might have one Heatran in there, but you'll have to find it. Although that will one-hit KO Glalie. So if they don't one-hit KO the Mega Glalie, then you sit there healing. They can't they can't get the KO. And then when they finally actually get you over 100 damage, you just play Lysandre to take out whatever you feel like. Because anything on their bench is going down. I love it. Whether it's going to be good or not, I can't tell you whether any of these cards are going to be good. That's not my job. My job here right now is to, myself appointed job, I made it up, but the job I've given myself is I am going to be telling you all about the new cards coming out, giving you some ideas for combos and cards you need to use with them and how they would be good and whether they're good or not, and then it's up to you guys to go and see if you want to play these cards. I love this set. I really love this set. I love the new Mega Mewtwo, the Mega Glalie. I love Hoot Hoot and Gallade and Gengar and Typhlosion, and it's just some really interesting cards in the set. But I will leave that up to you guys, because we are almost 58 minutes in, and it's time for me to go and put my feet up for another evening. So remember that you can find a full library of every-ish episode, apart from the 2 missing ones. I have no idea if I ever recorded them, but they are gone forever, at ptcgradio.wordpress.com. You can find all kinds of fun little videos, and I've now put up all the main rounds from the Sheffield League Challenge. The extra round will be going up probably tomorrow, I would say. And all kinds of other good stuff at youtube.com/PTCG Radio. And if you're one of the people that likes listening to this on YouTube, and you're listening on YouTube, just click the like button. It'll take you like 2 seconds. Go on. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, or you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. If you're out at Norwich or Sheffield this week, come and say hello, because I like people. I think people are fundamentally generally good, but that is a philosophical question for which we don't have time today. Look after yourselves till next week, ladies and gentlemen. I will give you reports from my tournaments next week, as long as telling you about more regionals, and we might even finally start looking at Pokemon tools next week. But until then, thank you very much for listening. My name is Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.